Claire Brooks was standing in the middle of my living room when she smiled that way. Not a warm smile. Not the kind sisters give each other when they are teasing. It was the kind of smile that tells you someone already believes they have won. Her phone was lifted in front of her face, the screen glowing with the faces of half my family. My mother, my aunt in Arizona, my cousin Daniel in Denver. Even my grandmother was there, leaning toward her camera like she did not want to miss a second. Claire tilted the phone so they could all see me. "Stop pretending." "Megan," she said, her voice light and amused. The words hit harder than she probably intended. Or maybe exactly as hard as she intended. I stood near the kitchen counter wearing sweatpants and a loose sweater, trying not to look as tired as I felt. Underneath that sweater was the white hospital bracelet they had given me earlier that afternoon during pre-op. Tomorrow morning I was scheduled for abdominal surgery I had waited almost a year to get. But according to my sister, the entire thing was an act. Claire laughed softly and turned the camera again so the family could see more of the apartment. "See what I mean?" she said. "She always gets sick right when I need help." Behind her, her two boys ran through the doorway and into my living room like it was their own house. One of them dropped his backpack directly onto my sofa. Claire did not even glance back at them. "I've got a flight to Palm Springs," she continued casually, checking the time on her watch. "You'll watch them this weekend. On the screen." No one objected. Not my mother. Not my cousins. Not even my grandmother. I stood there, completely silent. And somewhere deep in my chest, something began to crack. My name is Megan Brooks. I was 29 years old at the time, living alone in a small apartment in Portland, Oregon. It was nothing fancy. Just a one-bedroom place above a coffee shop that smelled permanently like roasted beans and cinnamon pastries. I had always liked it because it was quiet. At least, it used to be. In the Brooks family, I had always been the reliable one. The sister who answered the phone. The daughter who showed up early to help set up Thanksgiving tables. The aunt who could watch the kids whenever Claire needed a break. Claire was 3 years older than me and had 2 boys under the age of 10. Being a single mother was not easy. And for years I told myself that helping her was simply what family did. Somewhere along the way, though, helping had quietly turned into sacrificing. I was the one who canceled plans, the one who rearranged schedules, the one who showed up whenever everyone else had something more important to do. Earlier that evening, I had been standing in the bedroom folding a pair of pajamas into my overnight hospital bag. The bag sat open on the bed beside a stack of medical papers and the pre-surgery instructions the hospital had emailed me twice already. I had waited 11 months for this surgery. The inflammation in my abdomen had started as a dull ache 2 years earlier, something easy to ignore at first. But over time, the pain had become sharper, heavier, like a constant weight pressing from the inside. Dr. Samuel Carter had finally said the words I had been avoiding. We shouldn't delay this any longer. For the first time in months, I had allowed myself to feel hopeful. Then my phone rang. Claire's name flashed on the screen. I answered without thinking. "Megan, you need to cancel that surgery," she said immediately. No greeting. No question. Just an instruction. I sat down on the edge of the bed. "What?" "I booked a girls' trip to Palm Springs," she continued. Like the explanation should be obvious. "Flights are non-refundable and I already paid for the hotel." I waited, confused. "So," I asked, "so you need to watch the boys this weekend?" For a moment I honestly thought she was joking. "Claire, I can't postpone the surgery again," I said carefully. The doctor said, "Oh my God." "Megan," she interrupted with a laugh. "You're being dramatic again." The word dramatic hung in the air like something I had heard too many times before. "It's not dramatic," I said quietly. "It's surgery. It's a routine procedure," she replied. "You're acting like you're dying." My chest tightened. "I've already delayed it 3 times," I said. "Doctor, Carter told me not to wait any longer." Claire sighed loudly into the phone. The same tired sound she made when her kids refused to clean their rooms. "If you actually cared about family," she said, "you'd step up when someone needs help." The call ended a few seconds later. I stayed sitting on the edge of the bed staring at the hospital bag. That was when the messages began. My phone buzzed on the nightstand again and again. At first I ignored it, assuming Claire was texting me more instructions. Eventually I picked it up. The notifications were from the Brooks family group chat. Claire had already written a long message. Megan is pretending to be sick again so she doesn't have to help with the kids. The replies appeared almost immediately. Aunt Karen wrote that children should always come first. My cousin Daniel said family members needed to support each other. Then my mother, Linda Brooks, added her own message. Children are the priority. A small surgery can always be rescheduled. I read the words twice, then 3 times. No one asked how I felt. No one asked what the doctor had said. They were not trying to understand. They were simply agreeing with the version of me they already believed. Back in the present, Claire stood in my living room with that same confident smile while the family watched through her phone. Her youngest son was digging through his backpack looking for snacks. The older one had already turned on the television. Claire checked the time again. "I've got to go," she said. "My ride to the airport is waiting downstairs." She dropped the second backpack onto the sofa beside the first one. "Food's in the bag. They have soccer practice tomorrow morning." I finally found my voice. "My surgery is in less than an hour." Claire looked at me like I had just said something ridiculous. "Then call and move it," she replied. Before I could answer, she turned toward the door. "Family helps family," she added lightly. Then she walked out. The door closed behind her with a soft click. A moment later I heard her car start outside and pull away from the curb. The apartment fell quiet again. 2 children sat on my sofa watching cartoons. My hospital bag waited beside the door. And on the kitchen counter, my phone buzzed again as another message appeared in the family chat. Everyone was already assuming I would cancel the surgery. They were waiting to see if I would sacrifice myself again. For years, I always had, but standing there in that silent living room, I felt something shift inside me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't sure I was going to. My phone kept vibrating on the kitchen counter long after Claire's car disappeared down the street. Each buzz sounded louder than the last in the quiet apartment. I stood there for a moment staring at the backpacks on my sofa, then finally walked over and picked up the phone. The screen lit up with dozens of notifications from the Brooks family group chat. Claire had already told them everything, or at least her version of everything. Megan is pretending to be sick again so she doesn't have to help with the boys. That was the first message at the top of the screen. Underneath it were the replies. Aunt Karen had written, "Some people never grow up." My cousin Daniel responded with a shrug emoji and a message that said, "Kids come first." Another relative typed, "Family helps family." No one asked what was actually happening. No one asked if the surgery was real. They simply believed her. I scrolled slowly through the conversation, my chest tightening with every new message. Claire had continued explaining the situation as if she were narrating a story everyone already understood. "I asked Megan weeks ago," she wrote. "She always does this when it's time to step up." Someone reacted with a sad emoji. Someone else wrote that Claire deserved a break. My aunt even added, "You're a good mom." Claire, don't let anyone make you feel guilty. My thumb hovered over the screen. The entire conversation felt surreal, like reading a rumor about myself that had somehow taken on a life of its own. Then another message appeared. This one was from my mother. Linda Brooks rarely waited long before entering any family argument. "Children should always come first," she wrote. "A small procedure can be rescheduled." I stared at those words for a long time. She hadn't called me. She hadn't asked what the doctor said. She had simply decided. The surgery was small. The kids were more important. The conversation continued under her message like a quiet echo. Several relatives agreed with her immediately. "Exactly." One wrote, "Megan has always been sensitive." Another added, "I leaned back against the counter and felt a strange mix of anger and exhaustion. This wasn't the first time something like this had happened. It just felt bigger now." As I scrolled further up the chat, I began noticing older messages I had never really paid attention to before. Comments from months ago. Jokes from years earlier. Small things I had brushed aside at the time. Claire once wrote during a holiday dinner, "Careful. Megan might suddenly feel sick again." Someone had responded with laughing emojis. Another time, my aunt had asked why I left a birthday party early. My mother replied before I even had the chance. Megan has always had a vivid imagination about pain. More laughing emojis followed that one too. I stared at the screen as the pattern slowly unfolded in front of me. It hadn't started yesterday. It hadn't started with Claire. This story about me had been growing quietly for years. The dramatic sister. The one who exaggerated. The one who made things about herself. For the first time, I realized something that made my stomach twist. They didn't misunderstand me. They had already decided who I was. A memory surfaced before I could stop it. Last year at my cousin's birthday dinner, I had been sitting at the end of the table trying to ignore the stabbing pain in my abdomen. The restaurant was loud and crowded. Every laugh echoed in my ears. When I finally stood up to leave early, Claire leaned back in her chair and said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Look at that." Megan's stomach acts up right when the dishes come out. The table laughed. I remembered forcing a small smile as I grabbed my coat. Then my mother said something that had sounded harmless at the time. "Oh, honey. You know Megan has always been a little dramatic." The words returned now with a weight they hadn't carried before. Back in my apartment, the television played softly in the living room. Claire's boys were sitting on the floor watching cartoons like nothing unusual had happened. One of them wandered into the kitchen holding a cereal box. "Aunt Megan, do we have milk?" His voice was completely casual. He had no idea what kind of storm was happening inside my phone. I opened the refrigerator and handed him the carton. "Thanks," he said before heading back to the living room. A minute later, the other boy called out from the couch, "Can we go to the park later?" The question stopped me in place. Tomorrow morning, I was supposed to be lying in a hospital bed recovering from surgery. But in their minds, the weekend was already planned. Movies. Pancakes. The park. I looked down at my phone again. Another notification appeared. This one wasn't in the group chat. It was a private message from Claire. "If you embarrass me in front of the family, don't expect me to help you later." I read it twice. Then a second message arrived. "You always make everything about you." I let out a slow breath and placed the phone on the table. For years, I had tried to be the reasonable one. The helpful one. The one who didn't cause trouble. I had canceled dinner plans. Skipped trips. Even delayed doctor appointments before because Claire needed someone to watch the kids. And every time I told myself it was temporary. Just this once. Just until things calmed down. But sitting there at the kitchen table, staring at the backpacks on my sofa, I realized something I had never allowed myself to admit before. None of it had ever been temporary. Helping had simply become expected. My time. My plans. My health. They had all quietly become things the family assumed they could rearrange. I picked up my phone again and opened the group chat. My fingers moved across the screen before I could stop them. "I'm not pretending." I typed, "My surgery is tomorrow morning." I stared at the message for a long time. My thumb hovered above the send button. I already knew how the conversation would go. They would question it, minimize it, laugh about it. The phone buzzed again before I made a decision. This time it wasn't the family. It was an automated message from Portland Medical Center. "Surgery reminder. Arrival time 6:45 a.m." The words glowed quietly on the screen. For a moment, everything else faded away. The messages, the accusations, the noise. Tomorrow morning I would be in a hospital. And whether my family believed it or not, the surgery was real. I locked the phone and set it back on the counter. In the living room, one of the boys laughed at something on the television. The apartment smelled faintly like coffee and cereal. And for the first time that night, I realized something else. No one in my family was planning to show up for me tomorrow. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, the messages from the family chat replayed in my head like a loop I couldn't turn off. Claire's voice, my mother's words, the laughing emojis from relatives who had never once asked me what the doctor said. By the time the sun started creeping through the blinds, I was already awake. The apartment was quiet, except for the soft sound of the television in the living room. Claire's boys were still there, curled up on the couch with blankets and cereal bowls from earlier. My overnight hospital bag sat on the kitchen table. I stared at it for a long time. For months I had been counting down to this appointment. Now I was walking into it knowing my entire family believed I was lying. Portland Medical Center was only 15 minutes away from my apartment. But the drive felt longer than usual. The parking garage was almost empty when I pulled in. My tires echoed against the concrete as I slowly rolled into a space near the elevator. For a moment, I just sat there with my hands on the steering wheel. Then I grabbed my bag and stepped out of the car. Inside the hospital lobby, everything smelled like disinfectant and fresh coffee from a small kiosk near the entrance. Nurses moved quickly between hallways, while a few early patients sat quietly in the waiting area. What I noticed most, though, was that no one seemed to be alone. A middle-aged man helped his mother fill out paperwork at the reception desk. A young couple sat close together, whispering while the woman held a hospital bracelet in her hand. Across the room, an elderly man was carefully adjusting a blanket over his wife's legs. Everyone had someone. I checked in at the front desk and gave my name. The receptionist smiled politely and confirmed my appointment with Dr. Samuel Carter. You can have a seat. He'll call you shortly. I nodded and sat down near the window. The chair felt colder than I expected. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I didn't need to look to know what it was. The family chat again. For a moment I considered opening it, then slipped the phone back into my bag instead. Whatever they were saying, it wouldn't change anything about this appointment. A few minutes later, a nurse opened the door and called my name. I followed her down a hallway lined with pale blue walls and quiet exam rooms until she showed me into a small consultation office. Dr. Samuel Carter entered a moment later carrying a tablet. He was in his late 40s with calm eyes and the kind of voice that made people slow down when he spoke. "Megan," he said as he sat down across from me. "How are you feeling today?" I hesitated. "Ready?" I said finally. He studied the scan images on his screen for a moment before turning it slightly toward me. "The inflammation here has progressed since last year," he explained, tracing a section of the image with his finger. "That's why we scheduled surgery now." He spoke gently but directly. "If this continues untreated, it could start affecting surrounding tissue. In some cases, that leads to long-term complications." I swallowed. "So postponing it again wouldn't be a good idea." He shook his head slowly. "I would strongly advise against delaying it further." For the first time in days, hearing someone acknowledge the seriousness of the situation made something inside my chest loosen slightly. At least one person believed me. "Doctor." Carter scrolled through my chart again. Then his eyebrows pulled together slightly. "It looks like this procedure has been postponed 3 times already," he said. I looked down at my hands. "Yes. Scheduling issues?" he asked. I nodded automatically. "Something like that." He watched me quietly for a moment. "Family responsibilities?" he asked gently. The question caught me off guard. I forced a small smile. "Sometimes." He didn't push further, but the concern in his expression was obvious. After a moment, he opened another form on the tablet. "Before surgery, we need to confirm your emergency contact," he said. "Someone who can make medical decisions if something unexpected happens." My stomach tightened. He slid the clipboard toward me with a pen. "Who will be with you tomorrow?" he asked. The answer should have been simple, but the image of Claire standing in my living room the night before came rushing back. Her smirk, the backpacks hitting the sofa. "Stop pretending." I wrote her name anyway. Claire Brooks. "Doctor?" Carter glanced at the form. "Your sister?" he asked. "Yes." He paused for a moment. "Will she be available tomorrow?" I hesitated just long enough for him to notice. "Yes," I said quietly. He studied my face for another second, then nodded. "All right." Before the appointment ended, he leaned forward slightly. "Megan," he said, his voice more serious now. "You've been managing this condition for a long time. I know it's not easy." I nodded. "But tomorrow's procedure is important." he continued. Delaying it again could increase the risk of permanent damage. The word permanent echoed in my head. I thanked him and gathered my papers before leaving the office. The hallway outside felt brighter than before. As I walked toward the exit, I passed a patient being wheeled down the corridor on a stretcher while a woman walked beside him holding his hand. Their quiet conversation faded as they turned the corner. Surgery. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't something people pretended to need. It was something people prepared for carefully. Something they faced with fear. I stepped into the parking garage and finally pulled my phone from my bag. The screen lit up immediately. 23 unread messages in the family chat. At the top of the thread was another message from Claire. Megan refuses to help because of a tiny procedure. Several relatives had already replied. Then I saw my mother's message. Some people need to stop pretending they're always the victim. The words sat there like a weight. For a long moment I stared at them without blinking. Then I locked my phone and set it down on the passenger seat. As I started the car, another notification popped up on the dashboard screen. Surgery reminder. Arrival time 6:45 a.m. At that exact moment my phone buzzed again. Claire. A new text message appeared. Don't forget you're watching the boys tomorrow. I gripped the steering wheel. Because tomorrow morning, whether my family believed it or not, I was going to have to make a choice I had avoided my entire life. The sun had barely risen when I woke up. For a moment everything felt strangely calm. The apartment was quiet. The street outside hadn't filled with morning traffic yet. My overnight bag was already packed and sitting beside the front door exactly where I had left it. My surgery check-in was at 6:45. I glanced at the clock above the stove. 6:10. I moved slowly through the kitchen, making coffee I barely tasted. My stomach twisted with nerves. But underneath the anxiety was something steadier. Relief. After months of waiting, the surgery was finally happening. The hospital bracelet from pre-op still circled my wrist. White plastic against my skin. I turned it slightly as I rinsed my mug in the sink. Doctor? Carter's voice echoed in my mind. We shouldn't delay this any longer. I picked up my hospital bag and placed it beside the door. All I had to do now was grab my keys and drive to the hospital. Then the pounding started. 3 loud knocks rattled the door. Bam. Bam. Bum. Not the polite knock of a neighbor. The kind that meant someone expected the door to open immediately. My chest tightened. I walked over and opened it. Claire stood there holding her car keys and a half-finished coffee. Behind her, her 2 boys waited on the hallway carpet with backpacks slung over their shoulders. My stomach dropped. Claire didn't even say hello. She stepped past me into the apartment like she lived there. The boys rushed in right behind her. One of them tossed his backpack straight onto the sofa. The other headed for the television remote. Claire glanced around the room before her eyes landed on me. She slowly looked me up and down. "Oh, wow," she said with a small laugh. "You're really committing to the act today." Her gaze stopped at the hospital bracelet on my wrist. I folded my arms instinctively. My surgery is in less than an hour. Claire waved her hand like I had just mentioned a dentist appointment. You can call and move it. It doesn't work like that, I said. It absolutely does, she replied. Hospitals reschedule things all the time. The boys had already turned the television on. A cartoon blasted softly in the background while they argued over which cereal box to open. Claire leaned against the kitchen counter and took another sip of coffee. "You're making this way bigger than it is," she said. My voice stayed calm even though my chest felt tight. "Doctor, Carter told me not to delay it again." Claire rolled her eyes. "There you go again." Again. Like this was a routine performance. She nodded toward the bracelet. "Mom told us about this years ago. You know." My stomach twisted. "Told you what?" Claire shrugged casually. "That you exaggerate things. Especially when responsibility shows up." The words landed heavier than the knocks on the door earlier. She said it like it was common knowledge. Like everyone had always known. "Mom says you've done it since we were kids," Claire continued. "Headaches. Stomach aches. Stress. It's always something." A strange ringing filled my ears. Suddenly dozens of memories started making sense. Family dinners. Birthday parties. The times no one believed me when I said I was hurting. Claire pushed herself off the counter and checked the time on her phone. I really have to go. She walked into the living room and dropped the second backpack onto the sofa beside the first one. Snacks are in there, she said casually. And Jacob has soccer practice tomorrow morning. I stood frozen near the kitchen. Claire. She turned halfway toward the door. My surgery, I said slowly, is in less than an hour. She sighed like I was being difficult. Then call the hospital. I told you I can't. Claire shook her head and laughed softly. Stop pretending. Megan. The same words she had used in front of the family the night before. She grabbed her purse from the table and headed toward the door. You'll figure it out, she added. I followed her halfway across the room. You're leaving them here. She opened the door. Family helps family. Then she stepped into the hallway. The door closed behind her. A moment later, I heard the echo of her heels on the stairs and the distant slam of a car door outside. Her engine started. The sound faded down the street. Inside the apartment, everything went quiet again. The television played softly in the background. The boys sat on the sofa surrounded by their backpacks and cereal boxes. One of them glanced over at me. Are we staying here all weekend? He asked. I didn't answer. My hospital bag was still waiting by the front door. The clock above the kitchen read 6:16. My check-in time was 6:45. For a moment, I couldn't move. The room seemed to close in around me. 2 kids, 1 surgery, and a family that had already decided what I was going to do. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter again. Another message from the family group chat. I didn't need to read it to know what it said. Everyone assumed I would cancel. Everyone assumed I would stay. For years, I walked slowly across the living room and picked up my phone. Then I looked at the boys sitting on the couch. They trusted me. But so did the part of my body that had been in pain for 2 years. The clock ticked again. 6:17. I opened the hospital reminder message on my phone. Arrival time 6:45. My thumb hovered above the screen. For a moment, I almost called the hospital. Almost told them I couldn't make it. Because that was what the Brooks family expected. Standing there in my quiet apartment, surrounded by backpacks and cartoons and the weight of everyone's assumptions, I realized something that scared me more than the surgery itself. My entire family was waiting to see if I would sacrifice myself again. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't sure I was going to. The clock above the kitchen sink read 6:12 in the morning. My surgery check-in was at 6:45. 2 kids sat on my sofa eating cereal and watching cartoons like nothing unusual had happened. And my sister was already on her way to the airport. For a moment, I honestly considered canceling the surgery. That had always been my role in the family. When things became inconvenient, Megan adjusted. When someone else needed help, Megan stepped in. When something important to me conflicted with someone else's plans, Megan quietly gave up her plans. My phone was already in my hand. All I had to do was call the hospital and tell them I needed to reschedule. I opened the reminder message again. Arrival time 6:45. I stared at the number for several seconds. Then my phone buzzed again. Another message from the family group chat. Claire had posted something new. Megan agreed to watch the boys this weekend. Problem solved. Several people reacted immediately. My aunt sent a heart emoji. My cousin wrote, "That's the right thing to do." Another relative typed, "Family always comes through." I stared at the screen, my chest tightening. I hadn't agreed to anything. But in the story, Claire had already told everyone. My decision had already been made. The messages kept coming. Good for you. Megan. Kids should come first. Proud of you for stepping up. It felt like watching strangers write a version of my life that didn't include me. One of the boys wandered into the kitchen holding a cereal box. "Aunt Megan, can you make pancakes later?" he asked. His voice was cheerful and completely innocent. I forced a small smile. "Maybe." He nodded and walked back into the living room without thinking twice about it. The other boy called out from the couch, "Can we go to the park today?" I leaned against the counter and closed my eyes for a second. Tomorrow morning I was supposed to be recovering from surgery. Instead, The entire family already imagined a weekend of movies and pancakes. None of this was the boys' fault. They were just kids. But the expectations surrounding them felt like a heavy weight pressing against my chest. My phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't the group chat. A private message from Claire appeared on the screen. "If you embarrass me in front of the family, don't expect me to help you later." Before I could process that one, another message followed. "You always make everything about you." I stared at the words for a long moment. Then I placed the phone down on the table. For years I had told myself Claire needed more support than I did. She was raising 2 boys on her own. She was busy. She was overwhelmed. So I helped. Babysat. I changed plans. I missed things that mattered to me. But sitting there in my kitchen, watching cereal spill onto the counter while the television laughed in the other room, I finally saw the truth clearly. Helping had never been temporary. It had simply become expected. My time wasn't mine. My plans weren't mine. Even my health wasn't mine if it conflicted with what someone else needed. My eyes drifted to the stack of hospital paperwork on the table. "Doctor." Carter's voice echoed in my memory. "We shouldn't delay this any longer." The pain in my abdomen throbbed faintly as if reminding me it was still there. What if helping everyone else ruined my future? I picked up my phone again. But this time I didn't open the hospital number. Instead, I scrolled through my contacts. My thumb paused on a name. Eleanor Davis. She lived across the hall from me. 65 years old. A widow who had moved into the building 2 years earlier. We had started talking in the hallway sometimes. She had once brought me soup when I had a bad cold. I had never asked her for anything before. I hesitated. Then I pressed call. She answered almost immediately. "Megan." Her voice sounded alert, like she had already been awake for hours. "I'm sorry to call this early," I said quickly. But something happened. I explained everything in a rush. Claire dropping the kids off. The surgery in less than 30 minutes. The family believing I was pretending. For a few seconds, Eleanor didn't say anything. Then she spoke calmly. "You need to go to the hospital." I blinked. "What?" "You heard me," she said. "You need surgery. That comes first. But the boys, I'll come over." Her tone left no room for argument. 10 minutes later, there was a gentle knock on my door. Eleanor stepped inside wearing a light jacket and carrying a grocery bag. Her gray hair was tied back neatly, and her eyes scanned the apartment in one quick glance. The boys were still watching cartoons. Eleanor walked over to them with the easy confidence of someone who had spent years around children. "Morning." "Gentlemen," she said. "Anyone want toast?" Within minutes, the boys were sitting at the table eating breakfast, while Eleanor poured orange juice. Then she turned toward me. "You're still here?" she asked. I hesitated. I feel bad leaving them." Eleanor crossed her arms. "Megan," she said firmly, "you are not their emergency babysitter." Her words landed harder than anything my family had said. "You're a patient who needs surgery." No one had ever said it that clearly before. The truth sat in the room between us. I looked around the apartment. The hospital bag by the door. The boys eating toast. Eleanor calmly keeping everything under control. For the first time in years, it felt like I had permission to choose myself. I picked up the hospital bag. Eleanor smiled slightly. "That's better." A few minutes later, we were walking down the stairs of the building together. Eleanor insisted on driving. As we stepped outside into the cool morning air, I pulled out my phone one last time. I typed a message to Claire. "The kids are safe. I'm going to my surgery." Almost immediately, the phone started ringing. Claire. I watched the screen for a moment. Then I turned the phone face down on the seat. Eleanor started the car and pulled onto the quiet street. My phone continued vibrating with calls and messages. But for the first time in years, I didn't answer. And as the hospital building slowly came into view ahead of us, something unexpected settled in my chest. Peace. Because by choosing my surgery that morning, I had just started the biggest conflict my family had ever faced. The hospital building looked colder than usual that morning. Eleanor pulled the car into the drop-off lane and turned off the engine. then looked over at me like she was making sure I wasn't about to change my mind. "You ready?" she asked. I nodded, even though my hands were shaking. We stepped out into the quiet morning air together. The sliding glass doors of Portland Medical Center opened with a soft mechanical sound as we walked inside. The lobby smelled like disinfectant and coffee. People moved through the halls with quiet urgency. Nurses pushing carts, doctors reading charts, families sitting close together in the waiting area. Eleanor stayed beside me the entire time. At the check-in desk, the receptionist looked up and smiled politely. "Name: Megan Brooks." She typed for a moment and nodded. "You're right on time." Right on time. The words felt strange considering how close I had come to not being there at all. A nurse led us through a hallway into the pre-surgery unit. The room they brought me into was small and bright with medical equipment lining the walls. "Go ahead and change into the gown," the nurse said gently. Eleanor sat in the chair near the bed while I changed behind the curtain. The hospital gown felt thin and cold against my skin. When I stepped out, the nurse began attaching monitors and checking my blood pressure. My phone buzzed again on the bedside table. Once, then again, and again. I already knew who it was. Claire. My mother. Probably the entire family group chat by now. For a moment, I picked up the phone. 32 missed calls. A flood of new messages. Some demanded to know where I was. Others accused me of abandoning the boys. I stared at the screen for a moment before setting the phone down again. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to explain myself. Eleanor watched me quietly. "You don't have to answer that," she said. I nodded. The door opened and Dr. Samuel Carter stepped into the room. "Megan," he said with a reassuring smile. "Good morning." "Good morning." He glanced at the chart in his hands before looking up again. "How are you feeling?" "Nervous," I admitted. "That's normal." He began reviewing a few details about the procedure, explaining what would happen once I entered the operating room. I listened, but my thoughts kept drifting back to the morning. Claire's smirk. The backpacks on my sofa. The moment I almost canceled. Before I could stop myself, I spoke. "My sister dropped her kids off this morning," I said quietly. "Doctor?" Carter paused. She expected me to cancel the surgery and watch them. Eleanor shifted slightly in her chair but stayed silent. "Doctor?" Carter's expression changed. "You almost canceled because of that." I nodded. "My family thinks I'm exaggerating the illness." The room went quiet for a moment. "Doctor." Carter looked down at my chart again before speaking carefully. "Megan, what you're dealing with is not minor. The inflammation we saw in your scans is serious." He leaned forward slightly. If this surgery had been delayed again, there was a real risk of long-term damage. Hearing him say it so plainly made my chest tighten. I had come so close to letting it happen. "Doctor?" Carter flipped through a few pages on the clipboard. "Let's confirm your emergency contact," he said. He looked down at the form. "Claire Brooks." He glanced up at me. "Is she available today?" I hesitated. The image of Claire laughing in my living room flashed through my mind. Then I looked over at Eleanor sitting beside the bed. "Dr. Carter followed my gaze. "Is this Mrs. Davis?" he asked. Eleanor nodded. "Yes." "Dr. Carter looked back at the form. "If you're comfortable with it, we can add her as an additional emergency contact." Eleanor didn't hesitate. "Of course." I felt something in my chest loosen slightly. "Doctor?" Carter wrote Eleanor's name onto the form. "Good," he said. "It's important to have someone reliable." The nurse returned with a warm blanket and placed it gently over me. "You'll be heading to the operating room soon," she said. My hands started trembling again. Eleanor reached over and squeezed them. "You're going to be fine," she said softly. I nodded. "I know." A few minutes later, the anesthesiologist entered and began preparing the IV. The room filled with quiet activity. Machines beeping. Metal instruments clinking softly. My hospital bed began rolling down the hallway toward the operating room. Bright lights passed overhead as we moved. The hallway seemed longer than before. When we reached the operating room doors, Eleanor leaned closer to me. "You matter too," she said quietly. The words stayed with me as the staff wheeled me inside. The operating room was bright and cold. The surgical team moved around with calm precision, preparing instruments and adjusting monitors. The anesthesiologist spoke gently while inserting the IV. "You'll feel sleepy in a moment." I nodded. My mind drifted back to the past 24 hours. Claire standing in my living room. The messages in the family chat. The moment I almost called the hospital to cancel. For years I had chosen everyone else. But not today. The medication began flowing through the IV. My vision blurred around the edges. The lights above me softened. My last clear thought before everything faded was simple. For the first time in my life, I chose myself. Across the country, the sun was bright over Palm Springs. Claire sat at an outdoor brunch table surrounded by friends. A mimosa glass in her hand. She was laughing at something someone had just said. Her phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at the screen. Unknown number. She almost ignored it. Then it rang again. Claire sighed and picked up the phone. "Hello?" A calm voice answered on the other end. "Is this Claire Brooks?" "Yes. This is Dr. Samuel Carter calling from Portland Medical Center regarding your sister." Claire's smile slowly disappeared. Claire Brooks had never liked hospitals. Even hearing the word made her uncomfortable. Yet, as Dr. Samuel Carter's voice came through the phone, calm and professional, she felt something colder than discomfort crawl up the back of her neck. "Is this Claire Brooks?" he asked again. Claire sat up straighter in her chair. "Yes." "What is this about?" Around her, the patio restaurant in Palm Springs buzzed with laughter and music. Sunlight reflected off glasses of orange juice and champagne. Her friends were mid-conversation, completely unaware of the shift happening at the table. "This is Dr. Samuel Carter from Portland Medical Center," he said. "I'm calling regarding Megan Brooks." Claire frowned. "Megan." Her tone carried mild annoyance more than concern. "Yes," the doctor continued. "You are listed as her emergency contact." Claire leaned back in her chair, already irritated. "Is she okay?" I told her she should just reschedule that procedure. There was a brief pause on the line. Then the doctor spoke again. Slower this time. "Megan is currently in surgery." Claire's fingers tightened around the phone. "What?" "The procedure began earlier this morning." Her mind scrambled to process what he was saying. "That's impossible," she said quickly. "She's watching my kids this weekend." Another short pause. "I'm afraid there may have been a misunderstanding." "Doctor," Carter replied. Claire sat frozen as the words settled in. She imagined Megan standing in her apartment, surrounded by backpacks and cereal bowls, complaining dramatically the way she always did. Except apparently Megan wasn't there. She was in an operating room. "Doctor," Carter continued speaking. "The surgery was medically necessary and had already been delayed multiple times." Claire's stomach tightened. "Well, she does that sometimes," Claire said carefully. "She exaggerates things." Silence filled the line for a moment. Then the doctor's voice returned. Calm but firm. "Megan's condition is serious." Claire's heart skipped slightly. "What do you mean serious?" "The inflammation we found has progressed significantly," he explained. "Delaying the procedure again could have caused permanent damage." "Permanent." The word hit harder than Claire expected. She glanced around the table. Her friends were laughing about something one of them had said, clinking glasses together in the warm desert sun. Everything felt strangely distant. "So the surgery went fine?" Claire asked quickly. Another pause. "We did encounter some complications." "Doctor," Carter said. Claire's stomach dropped. "Complications." "Megan is stable," he clarified. "But the procedure was more complex than we initially expected." The restaurant noise around her faded into a dull blur. Her fingers tightened around the phone. "Why are you telling me this?" "You are listed as her emergency contact," the doctor said. Claire stared at the table. A slice of avocado toast sat untouched in front of her. For the first time that morning, she didn't feel hungry. "How serious are these complications?" she asked. Doctor? Carter exhaled slowly before answering. Megan had been living with this condition longer than she should have. The delays made the surgery more difficult. Claire's throat felt dry. She suddenly remembered Megan's voice from the night before. Doctor? Carter told me not to delay it again. Claire had laughed. She had told her to stop pretending. What kind of complications? She asked quietly. The inflammation had begun affecting surrounding tissue. The doctor said. There was also risk to her reproductive health. Claire's breath caught. What does that mean? It means that if the surgery had been delayed again, Megan could have suffered long-term consequences. The words echoed in her ears. Long-term consequences. Claire pressed a hand against her forehead. Across the table, one of her friends leaned forward. Everything okay? She asked. Claire raised a finger, signaling for a moment. Megan told us she needed surgery. The doctor continued. But from what she explained this morning, her family believed she was exaggerating. Claire didn't respond, because that was exactly what she had believed. What all of them had believed. Doctor, Carter spoke again. Sometimes patients delay medical care because they feel pressure from family responsibilities. Claire's stomach twisted. The image of Megan standing in the kitchen flashed through her mind. The hospital bracelet on her wrist. Claire had rolled her eyes at it. Stop pretending. Her chest tightened. Where is she now? Claire asked quietly. She is still in surgery. The doctor replied. The procedure is ongoing. Claire looked down at her phone. Her reflection stared back at her from the dark screen. The confident smile she had worn all morning was gone. How long will it take? She asked. Several hours. Claire swallowed. Should I come there? That would be advisable. Doctor, Carter said gently. Claire hung up the phone slowly. The table was silent now. Her friends watched her carefully. What happened? One asked. Claire stood up abruptly. I have to go back to Portland. They stared at her. What? Why? My sister is in surgery. Another friend blinked. I thought you said she was pretending. Claire opened her mouth to answer. But no words came out. Because for the first time since the argument began, a frightening possibility had finally entered her mind. What if Megan hadn't been pretending? What if everything Claire had said, everything the family had repeated, was wrong? Claire grabbed her purse and walked quickly toward the parking lot. Her phone buzzed again in her hand. A message from the Brooks family group chat. Mom, did Megan cancel the surgery yet? Claire stopped walking. The message glowed on the screen. She stared at it for several seconds. Then another message appeared. Aunt Karen. Hope she's finally being responsible. Claire's chest tightened painfully. Because somewhere across the country, in a hospital operating room, Megan Brooks was fighting through a surgery she almost never had. And for the first time in years, Claire was starting to wonder if her sister had been telling the truth all along. When I opened my eyes again, the first thing I noticed was the quiet. Not the heavy silence of my apartment, but the softer kind that lives in hospital rooms. The steady beep of a monitor. The distant sound of a cart rolling down the hallway. A quiet voice somewhere behind a curtain. For a few seconds I couldn't remember where I was. Then the dull ache in my abdomen returned. Deep and heavy. And everything came rushing back. The surgery. The hospital. Claire. I blinked slowly. Trying to focus, the ceiling above me was pale and unfamiliar. A plastic tube rested near my arm where the IV line ran into my hand. My throat felt dry. Megan. The voice came from the right side of the room. I turned my head slightly. My father was sitting beside the bed. Richard Brooks looked older than I remembered from the last family gathering. His hair had more gray in it now, and he held one of my hands carefully like he was afraid to move too quickly. Hey, he said quietly when he saw my eyes open. For a moment I just stared at him. You're awake, he added, relief softening his voice. My mouth felt heavy when I tried to speak. How long? A few hours, he said. The surgery took longer than expected. Fragments of memory surfaced. The bright lights of the operating room. Doctor? Carter's voice. Eleanor telling me I mattered too. Did it work? I asked. My father nodded. The doctor said the surgery was successful. A wave of quiet relief washed through my chest. Successful. The word felt unreal after months of waiting and fear. I closed my eyes briefly, letting the tension drain from my shoulders. When I opened them again, I noticed someone standing near the corner of the room. Claire. She wasn't smiling. She stood near the wall with her arms wrapped tightly around herself. Her eyes red like she hadn't slept. For the first time in years, she looked uncertain. Our eyes met. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she stepped closer to the bed. "I talked to your doctor?" she said quietly. Her voice sounded smaller than usual. I didn't answer. My father shifted slightly in his chair but remained silent. Claire looked down at the floor for a moment before speaking again. I didn't know it was that serious. The words hung in the air between us. I thought about the night before. "Stop pretending." The memory still stung. "You told everyone I was faking it," I said. My voice came out softer than I expected. Claire flinched slightly. "I believed what Mom said," she admitted. My father frowned. "What do you mean?" he asked. Claire looked between the two of us. "For years, Mom told everyone Megan exaggerates medical stuff," she said slowly. She said Megan always used illness to avoid responsibility. The room went quiet. My father's expression darkened. "She said that," he asked. Claire nodded. "She told the whole family." Something inside my chest shifted. All those years of people rolling their eyes when I mentioned pain. The jokes at dinner tables. The messages in the family chat. Suddenly it all made sense. "They believed her," I said quietly. Claire nodded again. "I did too." Her voice cracked slightly. "I thought you were being dramatic." I stared at the ceiling for a moment, absorbing the weight of that confession. My father squeezed my hand gently. "Well," he said firmly, "that story ends now." Claire wiped quickly at her eyes. "I already told the family," she said. I turned my head slightly. "Told them what?" "The truth," she said. "That the surgery was real. That the doctor said it was serious. That you could have had permanent damage if you delayed it again." I watched her carefully. "And?" I asked. Claire looked ashamed. They didn't know what to say. I wasn't surprised. For years, the Brooks family had believed one version of me. The dramatic sister. The unreliable one. Now that version had collapsed. Claire shifted awkwardly beside the bed. "I'm hiring a full-time babysitter," she said suddenly. I blinked. "What?" "For the boys," she explained quickly. "You're not my emergency backup anymore." My father nodded approvingly. Claire looked down again. "And if anyone in the family says you're exaggerating again, I'll shut it down." The room fell quiet once more. For years I had imagined revenge in 100 different ways. Proving everyone wrong. Forcing them to admit the truth. Watching them feel the same humiliation I had felt. But lying there in that hospital bed, something strange happened. I realized I didn't need revenge. Because the truth had already done the work for me. The next few days passed slowly. Recovery was painful but steady. Eleanor visited twice. Bringing magazines and a bag of homemade cookies, she insisted the nurses keep at the station. My father came every evening after work. Claire came too. She didn't ask for favors. She didn't bring her kids. Sometimes she just sat quietly in the chair and asked how I felt. And for the first time in years, no one questioned the answer. A week later, I walked carefully out of Portland Medical Center for the first time since the surgery. The afternoon air felt cool against my skin. Claire stood beside her car in the parking lot. She opened the passenger door when she saw me. "Need a ride home?" she asked. I hesitated for a moment. Then I nodded. As the car pulled out of the hospital parking lot, the city streets rolled quietly past the windows. For most of the drive, we didn't say much. But something had changed. Not just in Claire. In me. For years, I believed being the good daughter. The helpful sister. The reliable aunt meant sacrificing whatever parts of my life didn't fit into the family's expectations. Now I understood something different. Taking care of myself wasn't selfish. It was necessary, because the moment I chose my health over their expectations, everything began to change. And sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't hurting the people who doubted you. It's simply refusing to let them define your life anymore. If this story made you think about the boundaries in your own life, share your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy stories about family drama, hidden truths, and the moment when the truth finally changes everything, make sure you stay with this channel and subscribe for the next story. This story is fictionalized for dramatic effect.